Let's go to Nancy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nancy Smith. I'm Executive Director of Grow Smart Maine. We are a statewide nonprofit organization, and we work at the intersection of economic development, environmental conservation, and community revitalization. I live in Monmouth, about 50 miles north of here, where our town just passed an economic development TIF, so it's been interesting to watch that progress and continue to watch it. We do our work in 3 different ways: advocacy, networking, and community planning projects. So I'll be giving you some of the highlights of the advocacy work. I will also be demonstrating how not to do a PowerPoint. There's no color, there's no pictures, there's lots of text. But I prepared this yesterday because things are moving so quickly. I actually have edits I needed to make this morning because things have changed. And I got a text about 10 minutes before I left my office with update on one of the bills as they move through. How many of you have ever come to the Capitol building in Augusta? Okay. So I'm going to give a real quick primer just so that the information that I use is relevant and has value. It's a 2-year term when people are elected, when legislators, representatives, and senators are elected. Bills are submitted. There's no limit to them. There's no incentive to consolidate, work together, put in just one, and there just isn't the time. I've used one of the policy areas as an example of this. Bills are referred to a policy committee where they receive a public hearing and a work session. The end result is then brought back to both the House and the Senate for a first reading, a second reading, and then it has to be engrossed where the legal language is all put together, then final enactment, then it goes to the governor's desk. Things that can happen to a bill. It can be enacted with or without the governor's signature. Where we are right now, if he doesn't veto it, in 10 days it becomes law without his signature. Or he can sign it. It can be dead. That is a technical legal term for a bill. That means it did not pass in both the House and Senate. It can be carried over. A committee can request to the legislative leadership that they keep a bill in their committee between the first session and the second session. Each term is 2 years. There are some that I'm going to describe here that are still pending, meaning it's not yet reported out of the committee. In the committee, they can be voted ought not to pass, or ought to pass as amended. There's one more weird outcome that I will highlight at the end that doesn't fall into any of these categories. What I tried to do to make this relevant as I tried to capture all of the transportation policy issues that have come before the legislature in this term in 15 minutes or less. East-West Highway is my example of lots of bills that came in and the outcomes. There are other policy focuses we look at. Money is always an issue. Rail, there were a couple of bills. The budget, the bonds, and some broader policy initiatives. Here's my example of, this is actually probably one of the better ones of my PowerPoints. East-West Highway, as a bit of background, you may remember that in the previous legislature, Representative Doug Thomas sponsored a bill that required MDO, Maine Department of Transportation, to do a $300,000 economic feasibility study on a private east-west highway. This was an economic feasibility study, not a does it make sense for the state of Maine, what are the environmental impacts. It was an economic feasibility study. Last summer, coincidentally, when Representative Doug Thomas was running for Senate and was going door to door in, let's say the area that this corridor would be through, he found that people were upset. And at his request, Governor LePage put a hold on the study and it helped. So that's the background that brings us to this session. You have 2 bills listed here. One was to prohibit the use of public funds, so that bill is dead. 721 provides transparency. That bill was signed by the governor, and that requires that any information that is brought forward by the Department of Transportation is public information and is open for FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. You have another dead bill asking to do the same thing. And then you have a resolve to repeal the requirement that they do the study. That bill became law without the governor's signature. You have 3 more bills doing the same thing, all dead. What happens in a committee is if they have their act together and things are flowing smoothly, they may very well have held a public hearing in one day on all of these bills. You listen to them all, you take what you like, you kill most of them, and then you advance forward with 1 or 2 bills. 2 bills passed, one with governor's signature, one without. I don't know why. But there are stories behind how all of this happens. Policy focus. LD 120 is, I think, one that will be of interest to the topic area today. It's been carried over, meaning it's going to stay in the committee until next year. It is a concept bill. It's 1 sentence or 2 sentences. The intent is to enable delivery of cost-effective, sustainable, customer-focused transportation services to meet current and future needs. The sponsors, Ann Peoples, the House Chair of the Transportation Committee. As you move forward and you're pondering, do we need to put in a bill, this one is sitting there and will be ripe for the next session, and conversations might be worthwhile. Another one that fell into transportation that I thought was interesting was 127, a public way. Now includes streets that are in quasi-governmental corporations. Became law without the governor's signature. This is where you look at, the sponsor was Senator Stan Grozovsky, who lives in Brunswick. My guess is this has to do with Brunswick Landing. I don't know the details behind what was happening, but it's another bill that might be of interest to you. 403 was a bill that Grow Smart Maine testified in favor of, wanted a task force to establish complete streets policies within Department of Transportation. The bill is dead. Department of Transportation said, yeah, we already do that. The department has been asked to come back to the committee next year and demonstrate how they have made these policies that they already do readily accessible on their website. So we'll see how that moves forward. Other policy ones of interest, you have a commuter and rail advisory task force ought not to pass in the committee. It will probably be dead, it's just not dead yet. If you have a unanimous ought not to pass out of committee, it takes a 2/3 vote of the body to bring it back to life. I only saw it happen once in the 8 years that I served, and it's because there had been an error and the speaker actually asked that we vote to bring it back to life so they could deal with it. Other than that, if it's dead in the committee, the rest of the body trusts the committee that they knew what they were doing when they killed it. You can see some of the other highlights here. Streamlining the laws related to transportation. They're asking the department to report back with recommendations on how to streamline their regulations. It also is allowing for easier access on controlled access highways, where the commissioner will be allowed to make exceptions more easily. LD 1467, I think, is interesting. It has passed, enacted in both bodies. We'll see what the governor does with it. It is allowing for a study to be done on truck traffic in Ashland in order to improve the forest products industry. What it's doing is proposing that they increase the weight limits on the axles for truck traffic that's going between the harvest sites and the mills. Money. There was a bill for the Garvey bond. A Garvey bond, somewhere I have written down what the initials stand for, but it's a revenue anticipation bond in anticipation of federal funds. It was voted ought not to pass by the committee and then tabled. I'm not sure what's going on there. I understand that it really is dead. But as I'll outline in a little bit, they are looking at producing another Garvey bill as well. There was a bill now dead that would have required legislative approval for bonds put out by the Maine Turnpike Authority, a pushback from the legislation on how the Turnpike Authority was being managed. The bill is dead. I thought it was interesting that rail was highlighted a few times. What I'm seeing is a fight over who's going to get the attention next. You've got Lewiston, Auburn wants it, Bucksport wants it, not for rail so much, they want it for the freight to get to the paper mill down there. I don't know a lot about rail, but I know that it's interesting when these things percolate up. And of course, we have this year only one billboard law. In the 125th, when the Republicans held majorities in both House and Senate, I think there were more than 10 that would roll back our limitations on billboards. This one we just saw one, and the bill is dead. This title is the transportation budget. LD 1480 is separate from the general fund budget. There's another work session happening on it today. There have been, I think I counted 10 different work sessions already where the Transportation Committee is working on that particular and important legislation. There are a couple of things going on in the committee. One of the recommendations, one of the things in the budget is to shift the funding for state police. This is based on an OPEGA study, the Office of Policy Evaluation and Government Efficiency or something like that, OPEGA. They did a study at the time the state police found. The general fund had only been paying 51% of state police funding. What they found is that 65% of state police time is spent on non-transportation. So they're looking at increasing the money that has to come from the general fund, freeing up highway fund for more investments. The second piece of it is they also, I believe the governor's transportation budget, suggested that the excise tax on tractor trailers that now goes to towns stay with the state highway fund. There's no support for that in the committee. They're looking for other options, which means other or different revenue sources or less revenue sharing with the towns for transportation or reducing the amount that they do, period. Transportation bonds. All bonds, I think, there are 32 bond proposals, each distinct bill. They're all being heard by appropriations tomorrow. It's basically open mic day from noon until they're done. People have 2 minutes to come and testify on any of these bills. 6 of them relate to transportation. LD 1095 is the governor's bill on transportation. There's one that they couldn't choose a category for. It's listed as both economic development and transportation. I will be preparing testimony and testifying on probably about a half dozen of those in support of them. There are a couple of broader policy issues I thought would be of interest to this group. LD 825. You can read the bill title there. There was a study done in 2010 called The People and Nature Adapting to the Changing Climate, Charting Maine's Course. How do we adapt to the fact that we know climate change is coming? What this bill said originally was implement it, keep going, continue with the study, where the current administration pulled it off the to-do list for DEP this time around. Currently, there's a majority vote, and I made an error on this, it's not carried over. The majority vote is a resolve, and I can tell you that yesterday it passed in the House by a roll call of 83 to 55. Not a single Republican voted for it, including 2 who on the committee voted for it. All but 2 Democrats voted for it and passed. And this morning it went under the hammer, meaning there's no roll call vote in the Senate. So that likely will pass, and we'll see what the governor does with it. They are charging a stakeholder group, not state government, with coming up with recommendations on how to implement this plan that came in 2010. They have until next year for preliminary steps and 2015 for a final report. The Nature Conservancy has offered to lead a task force on this issue. That's where I met you. It was at that public hearing. So it looks like a good outcome. We'll see what the governor does. LD 1528 is fascinating. It is, as you can see from the bill title, smart growth. The representative who sponsored it is Dick Campbell, who introduced himself to me and said, I am the most conservative representative here, just look at my voting record. And yet, he is a developer who thoroughly embraces smart growth from the libertarian perspective of we can't afford to provide services to people who are sprawling out all over the place. I've had fascinating conversations with him. He is 100% behind this and eager to get it done. The current status is approval to carry it over, which means it's going to sit in the committee. Next year it'll come back. There is a stakeholder group coming together. Representative Campbell wants to be one of the leaders. He's asked me to be one of the leaders along with Evan Rickard, who he's been working with on this bill for months prior to this. It's relevant to you because one of the charges is for the Department of Transportation to develop principles and guidelines that emphasize walkable communities in order to facilitate restoration of multiple functions of urban streets in accordance with the Sensible Transportation Act. There are other components of it as well, but we have an opportunity to perhaps really highlight the focus of smart growth principles within the legislature and within the administration. I'm closing with this slide because this is the webpage I went to get all of this information. If you are at all interested in any of this, if you want updates on what's been going on, this is the homepage for the legislature. You can find who your representative is, who your senator is. I ask this in any public meeting, how many of you can name both your representative and your senator? Okay. The next challenge, 6 months from now, I want you both to know who they are and to say, and they know who I am too. It is time to introduce yourself Tell them what your passion is, what your expertise is, what you're willing to help them with. So that when an issue comes up, you can call them at their home phone, because that's how we do it in Maine, and say, you remember we met, I want to talk with you about this issue. You can also find live video where you can watch what's going on. You can listen into committees. And in the upper right-hand corner where the LD number is, you can track these bills. It takes a little bit of work, but you can figure out the status of bills as they're moving through the process. That is the down and dirty, fastest, and yet not attractive update on what's going on in the legislature relative to transportation. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nancy. That was terrific. We should jump right into Carl's presentation, but what I want to do is make sure that for any of these questions that you may have, what you can do is hopefully funnel them and tailor them into your breakout sessions, because when we're evaluating these bigger ideas, the whole reason we have this marvelous update of so much information is to be thinking, okay, what kinds of legislative shifts and new frameworks might we need if we're going to be approaching this idea. So take your questions and tailor them to that context in your breakout sessions, and then we'll bring them back that way.
And as I'm leaving the mic, I forgot, there was one more I thought of last night after I emailed this. Interesting to note, LD 413 is dead. But the title was, an act to expand eligible project costs in development districts. What the bill would have done was allow municipal TIF money to be used for regional economic development projects. And it didn't fall into one of those categories of statuses, because what happens is it died between the bodies. The House passed it, the Senate referred it back to transportation, and then did a strategy where they insisted, meaning the bill is dead. So there's been an attempt to do regional use of TIFs for economic development, and for some reason it died. So as you move forward, finding out why 413 died would be interesting.
Nancy, who sponsored that bill, do you know?
No, but I can find out. Okay, well, thank you.